Today, we'll be making assemblies. Assemblies are useful when making things that have multiple moving parts, or when parts are made separate from each other. For instance, taking existing parts and combining them. Or perhaps there are multiple people working on a project, each separately designing parts to later be combined into an assembly. It's also useful when making something complex that needs to be disassembled for maintenance or for actual use. When we make an assembly, we define exactly how separate parts relate to each other, such as if they move or rotate relative to each other. Knowing how to make an assembly is key to being able to create complex designs with lots of separate moving parts. Let's get started. Fusion 360 approaches assemblies differently than other 3D modeling systems. While the basics are the same, there are some extra steps that must be taken. Pay attention to the process followed in this video so you don't encounter any unexpected hiccups while making your own assembly. Everything we have made in Fusion 360 has been bodies. For the most part, this is all you would ever need. When making assemblies in Fusion 360, you must create a component out of each body. I'll show you. I'll quickly make a 40 by 40 by 20 millimeter box with a 20 by 50 millimeter cylinder on top. I'll save this as example 1. Next, open up a new file, and I'll make a rectangular beam that is 10 millimeters thick and has a 20 millimeter hole. I save it as example 2. Make a new file. Now I'll make a 40 by 40 by 20 box again, this time with a 20 by 10 millimeter cylindrical hole. I save it as example 3. Now each file has one body in it, the objects we made. We must convert these to components. We do that by clicking here, selecting From Bodies, and selecting the object we made. Do this for all 3. Now we have 3 components, and we can start putting together our assembly. Save each one. First, pick which file to build the assembly in. I'll pick example 1. Under the Insert menu here, you can find the tool Insert Derive. What this allows us to do is insert components from another sketch. Click Insert Derive and click example 2. Now, it asks us to select what to derive from. You might want to click the object, but it will choose a body instead, which we don't want. Instead, go to the left side of the screen and click the component, which selects the component, not the body. Click OK. Do the same for example 3. Click Insert Derive, click example 3, pick the component, and hit OK. Right now, all of the components are sitting on top of each other. By using Move and selecting Components, we can separate them to make it easier. Now, we can create joints. Joints define how components interact with each other. They define whether they can move relative to each other and in what way. They can also define how far away they should be from each other. Joints can be found here or under the Assemble menu here. When we click it, we are first asked to capture this position. Click Capture, otherwise the components will all move back to their previous position. Then we are asked to choose 2 components. The first component is the one that will be moved, and the second will be the base. Be sure that you select your components in the right order. I'll pick example 2 first, and then example 1. It's also crucial that you select the parts of the components that will interact together. Here, the side of the hole in example 2 and the shaft of example 1 will interact, so I make sure to select these parts. Fusion 360 should now show you how they will move relative to each other. Here, the joint is rigid, so they cannot be pulled apart. If I change the joint to cylindrical, you can now see that the beam will move freely along the shaft. Now to join example 3. I want the end of the cylinder of example 1 to touch the bottom of the hole in example 3. Start another joint, select the bottom of the hole in example 3, and the top of the cylinder of example 1. I want these stuck together, so I make sure rigid is selected. Click OK. We've made our 3 parts in assembly. You can also add more parts to this assembly, as I'm doing here. I make a new file and make a 100mm long rail with a 40 by 20 rectangular cutout. I save it as example 4, make it a component, and save it again. I then insert Derive, click example 4, and click OK. I then move it as necessary and start a joint. I pick this side of example 4 and this side of example 3, select sliding, and hit OK. You may need to adjust the angle to get it right. This is the basic version of assemblies. Autodesk's website has more tutorials about the in-depth features of assemblies that are linked in the description, but these more advanced features are meant for engineering applications, and there are other modeling programs that are much more adept at handling large assemblies. All we need to know are the basics, which we learned in this video. Your assignment is to make an assembly with 4 components using at least 2 types of joints. Be sure that each component is created in a separate file. Good luck.